Classical conditioning. Alan has always loved baseball. But in a game last year, he was badly hurt by a wild pitch while he was up at bat. Now, although he still plays baseball, he gets anxious whenever it is his turn at bat, to the point where his heart rate increases, and he often backs away from the ball instead of swinging at it. One possible explanation of Alan's change in behavior, or learning, is classical conditioning, a theory that explains how we sometimes learn new responses as a result of two stimuli, in this case, the sight of an oncoming baseball and the pain of the ball's impact, being present at approximately the same time. Alan's current responses to a pitched ball, his feelings of anxiety, and his backing away, are ones he didn't exhibit before his painful experience with a baseball. Thus we can say learning has occurred. Pavlov is thought of as the father of classical conditioning, and although he won the Nobel Prize for his work on the digestive system, he is most widely remembered for his work with salivating dogs. Pavlov knew that dogs naturally salivated at the sight of food, which is why he was using dogs for his work on the digestive system. After the dogs were with him for a while, he noticed that not only were the dogs salivating at the appearance of meat, but also as soon as they heard the lab assistant coming down the hall to feed them. Pavlov then conducted experiments to explain this phenomenon. Classical conditioning begins with a stimulus-response association that already exists, an unconditioned stimulus-response association. Dogs salivate at the sight of meat, and people become anxious and back away when encountering a painful stimulus. No learning has occurred in either case. An unconditioned response is typically an automatic, involuntary emotional or physiological one, such as fear, sadness, joy, increased heart rate, sweating, or hands shaking. Responses that a person or animal has little control over. If you heard a loud bang in the next room, you would likely respond in some way, because we are born with a startle response. A neutral stimulus is one that doesn't elicit any particular response. Conditioning begins when a neutral stimulus is presented immediately before the unconditioned stimulus. In Pavlov's early studies, a light was turned on immediately before the meat. For Alan, a baseball is pitched immediately before the painful hit. Conditioning is especially likely to occur when both stimuli are presented together on several occasions, and when the neutral stimulus occurs only when the unconditioned stimulus is about to follow. Before long, the neutral stimulus on its own also elicits the same response. The neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus, and the response to it a conditioned response. Pavlov's dog acquired a conditioned response of salivation to a new conditioned stimulus, a ringing bell. Likewise, Alan acquired a conditioned response of anxiety and backing away to a pitched ball. You will notice that the unconditioned and conditioned responses are the same, so they are both involuntary emotional or physiological responses that occur automatically. The difference is the stimuli. Although this cartoon from the dog's perspective is humorous, it is not an example of classical conditioning, since writing in a book is not an automatic, involuntary emotional or physiological response. John Watson thought that Pavlov's experiment was interesting, and wondered if it would work with humans. So he and his graduate student conducted the now famous Little Albert experiment. As can be seen in this photograph, initially little Albert, who was 9 months old, had no fear of the white lab rat. It was a neutral stimulus. Unfortunately for little Albert, this was about to change. Watson struck a steel bar with a hammer which elicited a fear response. Little Albert was startled and began crying. After this had happened several times, little Albert became afraid of the white rat, and would start to cry as soon as the rat was brought out. Now it is time for you to apply what you have learned. What is the neutral stimulus? What is the unconditioned stimulus? What is the unconditioned response? What is the conditioned stimulus? What is the conditioned response? When people learn a conditioned response to a new stimulus, they may also respond in the same way to other similar stimuli. A phenomenon known as generalization. For example, Pavlov's dog salivating to bells of different ringtones, or a boy who learns to feel anxious about long division, may generalize that anxiety to other aspects of math. Generalization is the primary means through which learners transfer what they have learned from one setting to a new situation. How might Alan's fear generalize? Conditioned responses don't necessarily last forever. By pairing a bell with meat, Pavlov conditioned the dog to salivate to the bell alone. But later on, when he rang the bell repeatedly without ever again following it with meat, the dog salivated less and less. Eventually, the dog no longer salivated when it heard the bell ring. Extinction had occurred. Obviously, this is a different type of extinction than depicted in this cartoon, but I thought it was cute, and it does explain why unicorns no longer exist. Many conditioned responses fade over time. Unfortunately, many others do not. A person's fear of water, or anxiety about math may persist for years. People tend to avoid situations that cause unpleasant emotional reactions. If the child in the practice exercise never goes into an elevator again, he will never experience being in one that does not have a spider, and remain fearful of elevators. Psychologists have learned that one way to extinguish a negative emotional reaction to a particular conditioned stimulus is to introduce that stimulus slowly and gradually, while the person is happy or relaxed. If Bobby gets overly anxious every time he attempts a math problem, you might revert back to easier problems, those he can readily solve. And gradually increase the difficulty of his assignments only as he demonstrates greater competence and self-confidence. There are several other ways we can apply the principles of classical conditioning to the classroom. Plan activities that make classroom learning enjoyable. Provide positive feedback. Never ridicule students. When a particular subject or task arouses anxiety in students, present it slowly and gradually while they are happy and relaxed, and ensure they are successful. For example, instead of giving a presentation standing in front of the whole class, students could sit in a small group and read their report. Next time, they could read the report standing with a small group. Then move on to standing with a small group just using notes to give their presentation. Gradually the group size would increase, until they can present confidently in front of the whole class. There is nothing like success to help students feel good about being in the classroom. One thing you can do to promote student success is to structure the classroom environment so that appropriate behaviors are reinforced, and inappropriate behaviors are not. It is the role that reinforcement plays in learning that we will look at next.